Today, I'm talking to Chris Sandel about how possible recovery really is. Welcome to Fly to Freedom and welcome Chris Sandel from Real Health Radio. Chris is a nutritionist and a coach. He attended the College of Naturopathic Medicine and graduated with a diploma in nutritional therapy. He founded his own company, Seven Health, in 2009 and found his calling in working with eating disorders and helping people to fully recover. As a perpetual student, Chris is also trained in intuitive eating, health at every size, motivational interviewing, acceptance and commitment therapy, polyvagal therapy, neuro-linguistic programming, trauma, behavioral psychology, and habit formation. Wow. Originally from Sydney, Chris now lives in the UK with his wife, Ali, and 7-year-old son, Ramsey. Chris, wow, that's a whole list of achievements. Incredible. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
Okay, just before we get into the full questions, I've got a few icebreaker questions. So, number one, what's a small daily ritual or habit that brings you joy?
So this is one I've only just started doing. I've got back into doing some breathing and some stretching in the morning. And
Nice.
I've recognized how important it is to do some mobility stuff and to really get myself grounded for the day. So yeah, there are two things I'm starting with.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, I try to be as on it as possible with doing like some yoga and mobility at least a few times a week. Yeah, it definitely helps. Definitely, you feel the body releasing. So it feels
Yes.
great. If you could go back in time and give your younger self one piece of advice, what would it be?
The things are going to work out. Yeah, I think I had a challenging time as a teenager, and which probably we can get into it. Probably informs a lot of the work that I do here. And I think there was probably quite a few years of struggling. And I think if I could just tell my younger self, like it's going to be okay. You're going to make it through.
It always is okay in the end, isn't it? Everything always works out.
Yeah, yeah.
What's one thing about you that people would be surprised to learn?
I'm quite an avid golfer. I think I don't know if that's a common hobby, but yeah, I very much enjoy golf and I play a lot of golf and I listen to lots of golf podcasts and my 7-year-old son is also a very avid golfer, so it's a lovely hobby that we get to do together.
Oh, that I love that. I tried a golf lesson once. I was advised that perhaps a different hobby would be better for me.
It's something that takes more than just one lesson. It's a lot of work.
On the subject of hobbies, if you could instantly learn one new skill or hobby, what would it be and why?
Playing an instrument. It would either be the guitar or the piano. I'm thinking of that scene or the part from Groundhog Day where Bill Murray just spends his time learning to play piano for however long that time was. And yeah, just that skill to be able to pull out a guitar or to play a piano. I would
Yeah,
love to instantly have that.
that is cool and kind of a party trick too.
Yeah, a good party trick.
And two more questions. If you had an extra hour in your day, how would you spend it?
Um, it would depend. Sometimes it would be sleeping. Sometimes it would be playing golf. Yeah, I think it would there's not one allocation. I think it would be allocated across to different things.
Nice. And last question, which I ask all my guests, if you had a magic wand and could change one thing about you, about the world, or whatever you wanted to change, but it was just one thing, what would you change?
I mean, given the conversation we're going to have today, it would be that people don't suffer with eating disorders. Is the thing that comes to mind.
Awesome. Okay, so if somebody listening today was to follow all the advice you give in this episode,
Yep.
how would it change their life?
I think the advice from this episode and stuff that we're going to cover is the things that would allow you to either get started with recovery if you haven't already done that, or to make different or better changes through recovery to really get you to that point of full recovery. So I'm a huge advocate of full recovery. I believe that everyone can get there. I don't want people to do harm reduction or other options because I think it's really selling yourself short. And so I'm a big advocate of that. So I think that's kind of one of the main things that I would want people to get from this episode. That one, that's achievable, but two, by following the kinds of things that we're going to talk about, that you can get there.
Amazing. And I completely agree. There's so many people out there that say that you never fully recover and that you're always going to be in an eating disorder. And well, from my own personal experience, I know that's not true.
Yeah. Yeah. It's not. I think the other thing I would add connected to this is living with an eating disorder is more hard or more difficult than recovery. And I think that's one of the things that the eating disorder will trick you about, just how hard recovery is. And it's not that it's not hard. I think it is. It's challenging. For many people, it will be one of the most difficult things that they do. But living with an eating disorder is the harder thing of those two.
Absolutely. Yeah. You mentioned Groundhog Day earlier, and it really is like living this Groundhog Day of hell, just this over and over rigid prison-like existence. So can you tell us a little bit about you and what led you to doing what you do?
Yeah, so I'm originally from Sydney and I moved over to the UK when I was 21. I finished a business degree. I had no idea what I wanted to do. Thought I would just come over here, do a bit of traveling, and then go back home at some point. And we're 21 odd years on, and I've never left. But as part of coming over here, and the first people I lived with, one of the people in the household was with Into Nutrition, and it was something I'd never really paid any attention to or cared about, and just started reading about it and became really interested and fascinated by it, and went and studied nutrition. And when I was done and was setting up my practice, I didn't really know what I wanted to specialize in, or what would be of interest to me. And so I just kind of started with everyone, as is often the case in that situation. And what happened was I had this succession of clients where on paper everything appeared fine, but they had this real worry about so much things connected to health. There was all this worry about wanting to lose weight. There were all these, I mean, really, they had disordered eating. And what I discovered was I actually really enjoyed working with these clients. I enjoyed the messy side of nutrition and the messy side of human behavior. And really, I just started going into that area and reading about more about it, reading about all of the other pieces connected to it, connected to things like psychology and human behavior, and just became really, really fascinated with it. And just the more I wrote about it, the more I got those kind of clients, the more I talked about it on the podcast. And that was kind of how it went. And it probably started from people who were dieting and wanting to get off diets, to then more disordered eating, to more eating disorders. And then now it's a lot of people who've had very long-standing eating disorders, whether that's 10, 20, 30 years, and are in then wanting to fully recover.
I love that. I also love the fact that you said the messy side of nutrition.
Yes.
Because it's quite funny. When I was in the eating disorder, I was in my head like impeccable with nutrition and following all the rules and all the societal expectations. And I didn't realize that that was the messy side. I mean, now obviously I so do, but we can take all these rules, which depending on who you talk to are so different, about what we should eat, shouldn't eat, how much we should move, shouldn't move, and all these societal expectations and Instagram health advisors and all that sort of thing. And the more we go into that and the more we follow those, the messier it actually gets, even though we think we're following all the rules properly.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the things that people really forget about this is context. Context matters. What is right for one person might not be right for someone else. And so much of the information that people are taking in, especially when they're trying to recover, is information that's just not applicable for them.
Yes.
It's like if someone has a broken leg, the idea of you need to be doing 10,000 steps is ridiculous because you have a broken leg. And I'm
Yeah.
not even advocating that everyone needs to do 10,000 steps. I'm just using it as an example. And it's the same with if you have an eating disorder, there are things that you're going to need to do that is different to the average population because you have something that needs to be overcome that is different to the average population. And so I think that's a really important thing to remember, that context matters. And so what is important for you, not what is important for everyone else, or Julie in accounts, or Tom who you work with. Like, none of that matters. It's what is actually important for you.
Yes. Yeah. And also the fact that everybody's body is different. And when we're listening to all these rules and stuff, we're not listening to our bodies.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely. And I think, look, the listening to your body piece can often come a little later. It's that hard thing of with recovery. Sometimes we need to say, you know what, the feedback you're getting from your body is not particularly accurate at
Not
this
to begin with, no.
point because of the things that you've done, and we need to have some structure in place, but with the goal that you're getting back to being in this place of real intuition where you're not having to follow rules and rigid guidelines and all of that. It's that you're able to recognize, okay, what is the body asking for and how does it best work?
Yeah. Yeah. It's so beautiful when you can just forget all these so-called shoulds that
Yep.
are out there and just know that your body's got you.
Yeah. Yeah.
And all you have to do is listen. But you're absolutely right. To begin with, we're so disconnected from our bodies that we have to take different action because our bodies are just full of fear. And yeah. So talking about that, what would you say are some of the most common mistakes people make in recovery?
So, I mean, we can go in lots of different ways with this, but there's quite a few. One, and I think this is a really, really common one, and this will be common for people who are listening to this podcast or watching this podcast, is the consumption of information without then taking any action. I think there's a lot of that goes on where people can tell you all of the books they've read or all the podcasts they follow or the Instagram accounts or whatever it is, but at the end of the day, it's not leading to any action taking. And I think a big part of this is often there's this feeling of, if I listen to enough things, then I will feel super confident that the eating disorder thoughts will all die down because I'll know what is the correct path. I'll feel fully on board and motivated, and then I'll begin recovery. And the reality is that that is just never going to happen. It's
Yeah,
not that I'm
guilty.
against this content. It's just that this content needs to be paired with action taking. And if action taking is not happening, then your recovery is not happening. And so I think that is one of the biggest stumbling blocks as a starting point, is this feeling of, I need to feel ready, and I'll know when I feel ready and all of that. And I'm listening to this information in the hope that there will be this nugget that will just flick a switch and then I'll feel that thing. And that just doesn't happen.
Yeah. Like I resonate 100% with that. I read all the books, listened to all the podcasts,
Yeah.
did courses, watched videos. I just did everything bar taking action.
Yeah.
Figuring that something was going to make it okay. Something was going to stop the fear. And yeah, actions have to happen. Awareness, then action.
Yeah, for sure. So then I think the next one would be, and again, I think this is a very common one, is when making changes, that they need to be meaningful changes. They need to be big enough changes, because I think there can be a lot of making changes in the hope that this is going to appease the eating disorder. Like, if I make this small enough, then the eating disorder is going to be okay with it. They're not going to be upset. And the reality is that doesn't happen at all. Like, you just keep making it smaller and smaller and smaller, and you still keep getting the same, no, that's not okay. No, that's not okay. I had a client tell me about the fact that she was at a friend's house and she ate 2 green beans from the friend's garden and still had thoughts about that. And I was like, okay, this is a perfect example of just how irrational this thing is, that something so innocuous can still create eating disorder thoughts of like, you shouldn't have had those green beans. And so one is, okay, you're not going to be able to appease the eating disorder by making smaller and smaller changes. But two, with eating disorders, so much of it is about the physical state that the body is in, and that is then driving the kinds of thoughts and feelings, the fears, the behaviors, etc. And so you need to be making changes that are leading to that physiology changing, the physical repair taking place. Because otherwise you can spend a long time making lots and lots of little changes and actually nothing fundamentally changes in terms of how you're thinking and feeling. And so you're wanting to make changes that, one, are leading to this change in physiology, so that two, there is an upside for all the extra anxiety, because it's going to create anxiety. It's going to create worry. There's going to be more thoughts and feelings that come up, but you're then benefiting from that. Like the worst that can happen is like, I've spent all of this time thinking about this thing. I've spent the last 6 hours thinking about making this change, had huge amounts of anxiety, and then I bail on it at the last moment. So you've then got absolutely nothing to show for the fact that you've spent all this time worrying about this. And so I want people to do the opposite of making changes that are then meaningful, so that, yeah, there's this increased anxiety, but you're actually benefiting from it.
Absolutely. And negotiating with something that you don't want to keep is like
Yeah.
trying to still hang on to it.
Yes. Yes. Well, I think it's the negotiation in the hope that I'm going to win the argument. And it's like the same as going into a negotiation with ISIS about, I don't know, women's rights or whatever. Like you're fundamentally not going to win that argument, because that person is then not open to that conversation. And it's the same with the eating disorder. The eating disorder is not going to then turn around and be like, you know what, you mounted a really great argument there. You're right. That just doesn't happen. And so the goal shouldn't be, how do I win the argument? It's that I don't even get into that argument.
Yeah.
I think a good way of then thinking about it, it's the eating disorder is like the Wizard of Oz. In the early part of the film, there's all this smoke and lights and seems all powerful because Dorothy is then listening to the Wizard of Oz. And then later on, pull back a curtain and it's this old man with this little machine who is not powerful at all.
I
And
love
that is the eating disorder.
100%. Yeah, I absolutely love that analogy. I haven't heard that one before.
Yeah.
But yeah, I love that. That is so true.
Yeah.
You personally have never had an eating disorder, have you?
No.
So how do you think this impacts the work you do?
So I'm always really upfront about this when I'm on podcasts or on my site. It says this, and I think there are both upsides and downsides to this.
Mm-hmm.
And so the clear downside is I have not walked a mile in your shoes. I don't know what it's like to have an eating disorder. I can't say that that's my personal experience. And so there is a downside to that. The upside to this is, and this is often a trap that I see some coaches falling into. This isn't true for everyone, but I think for a lot of people, their own recovery journey can bias how they think everyone else should do recovery.
Yes, yeah, I would
And
agree.
so what it can do is it can create a lot of limitations in terms of how then someone does recovery with other people. And look, everyone has their biases. I have my biases. So it's not that because I haven't had an eating disorder, I have no biases at all. It's just I don't have my recovery creating a bias. So for example, if someone didn't go through therapy as part of the recovery, therapy wasn't an integral part of their recovery, they can come out thinking like no one needs to do therapy, that therapy isn't needed at all in recovery. And that's then the message that every single person gets. When for some people, that might not be important, but for other people, it is really important.
Yeah.
And so what I think can start to happen is that people are then biased by what recovery looked like for them, and that's just everything that is then offered. And then there's a lot of poo-pooing things that didn't seem relevant to them, and so it's not relevant to other people. And while I haven't had an eating disorder, as I kind of touched on at the beginning when you were asking me these different questions, I've gone through different stuff and difficult stuff myself. I had a very challenging time as a teenager in that I'm pretty small, not as small now as I used to be. In my sort of year 8, year 9 photos at school, it looked like I was in the wrong year because I was just that small compared to everyone. And so I had a lot of bullying connected to that. I had a lot of insecurities connected to that. Felt very bad about myself and my development and why I'm not going through puberty while everyone else is. So I have some real feelings of what it feels like to be in a situation where there's a lot of depression, where there's a lot of insecurity, where there's a lot of going to bed and just waking up hoping that tomorrow is going to be different and then it's not. And so no, I haven't gone through an eating disorder, but I've had lots of challenges that I've gone through. And that can be challenges like that, can be challenges connected to parenting. So there's lots of things that are similar in the difficulties that I've gone through that allow me to be able to say, okay, I haven't gone through what you've gone through, but I know what it's like to go through something that is similar to this. And so I'm able to bring compassion to that situation. I'm able to bring empathy to that situation. And so, yeah, I think that would be what I would say connected to that.
I totally agree, actually, because, well, number one, you need to meet each person where they're at because every person is different and
Yeah,
every person will be at a different stage in their recovery, in their life,
yeah,
their personal growth. And so, what was right for me, well, my clients don't all follow the path I followed because
yeah,
that's not me and I'm not them. But I also really hear you when you say that you went through stuff too, because ultimately the eating disorder isn't really about the food, it's a coping mechanism
yeah,
for a life that feels out of your control.
yeah,
And it's some way of feeling in control and feeling safe.
totally. Yeah, I agree. And so many of the practices and techniques and things that I work on with clients is stuff I use in my everyday life now. And it's one of the things I talk about with clients is this is going to serve you well as part of your eating disorder, but you're going to use these things forever because they are about how do you support your nervous system? How do you stay in the present moment? How do you deal with disappointment or different emotions coming up? How do you deal with unhelpful thoughts that arise and what to do when that happens? And so, yeah, I think that, yes, I don't have the experience of exactly what it's like, but I have a lot of similar experiences. And we all do as humans if we can really tap into this.
Absolutely. Um, so I heard you say that eating disorders are anxiety disorders, which is kind of what I alluded to a minute ago when the world feels out of your control. Can we
Yeah,
talk more about this?
yeah, for sure. So this was something that was brought to my attention from a client. So I was working with a client and she sent me this video and said, "Hey, I'd love you to watch this and let me know what you think." And it was a video of a person called Sasha Gorel. She's at the University of San Francisco. And it was a lecture of her doing a talk on, I think the title of the talk is Anorexia a Anxiety Disorder? And while anorexia was in the title, as part of the talk, she went on to talk about how it's not just anorexia, it's all eating disorders. And one of the things that she talked about as part of that is that when you look at the research around people who develop eating disorders, for many or most, they have higher anxiety than the average person predating
Mhm.
the eating disorder. So there is this anxiety that is there in the background. Someone then develops an eating disorder, and even when they fully recover, typically anxiety is going to be higher than the average person. And that's not to say that they can't cope or they can't have a lovely, meaningful life. It's just their baseline anxiety levels are higher than the average person. But what she really pointed out, and one of the things I've really taken to heart is that if you look at all eating disorders, there are three elements that they all have. And so the first is that they all have this fear of the consequences of eating. And so
Mhm.
we can look at this in a very stereotypical way. So anorexia, the fear is that I'm going to gain weight. In orthorexia, it's the fear of the cleanliness of healthiness around food. With ARFID, depending on which type of ARFID, it could be the fear of choking. So there's this fear of consequences of
Yes.
eating. The second component that they all have is this weight suppression, and that there is some weight suppression that predates the eating disorder, or is really the thing that kicks off that eating disorder. And someone at a latter point can be at a higher weight, but their body is still in a place where they're below where their body wants it to be. So there is this weight suppression component. And then the third thing is that there are behaviors that then maintain the eating disorder. And so there are things that someone is doing that then are continuing to perpetuate that eating disorder. So that could be stuff connected to exercise. It could be stuff connected to the amount of food or the types of food or the delaying of eating. But there are these behaviors that are occurring. And so if we look at those three, the first one and then the third one are all about anxiety. So the
Yes.
fear of the consequences or behaviors to try and mitigate those consequences and keep it up. And then that middle one actually makes anxiety worse. Like there may be a little honeymoon phase in the beginning when you're suppressing your weight where it feels like the anxiety goes away, but with time it just ramps up the anxiety. And so very much this is how I think about it. And the thing with all anxiety disorders is anxiety is about avoidance. Whatever the anxiety disorder, you are trying to avoid something. That could be certain thoughts, certain feelings, certain events, certain situations. But what you're wanting to do is either avoid that thing happening in the first place, or when that thing arises, how do I get it to stop immediately? And so this is why I think of eating disorders, anxiety disorders. And if you look at them, the research of, well, what do you do to overcome an anxiety disorder? It's exposure. It's doing the thing that you're afraid of. And so that is no longer something that is fearful. You're teaching the body that this thing that I've cataloged as a threat and that my nervous system is recognizing as a threat is actually not a threat, and that you're able to then have your body react differently than the way it currently does.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I also believe that self-compassion plays a huge role here as well, and reassuring
Yeah,
yourself. And rather than just accepting the thoughts, asking questions of them, take
yeah,
them out of your head and writing them down. Because when you leave them in your head, they just spin out of control and warp and distort and grow.
yeah,
But yeah, giving yourself compassion for how you're feeling
totally.
and
Yeah, yeah,
just
and look, there's nothing that I said there that I doesn't
no,
that I don't
no.
believe that compassion should be an integral part. Like it really does. It's so important. And when I'm working with people, one of the first places we start is looking at compassion. There's a fears of compassion scale that I will do with clients, looking at what's their ability to give compassion to other people, to receive compassion from other people, and to give compassion to themselves. And it's always an eye-opening conversation that we can then have around what does compassion mean, and how have you been doing compassion up until this point. So yes. In terms of your comment around the thoughts piece, I I would say depending on the situation will depend on what is most useful
Yeah.
in terms of dealing with the thoughts. As you talked about in my bio, I use acceptance and commitment therapy. And one of the things with that is, and acceptance and commitment therapy is an offshoot of CBT. And
Mhm.
with CBT, depending on which flavor someone does of it, there can be more of a focus on the C piece, the cognitive piece, and there can be more of a focus on the B piece, the behavior piece. And ACT is a lot more of focusing on the behavior piece, because you can get into a lot of a bit of a trap of just spending all this time thinking about your thoughts and analyzing your thoughts and that kind of thing. And so it will depend on the situation, but a lot of what acceptance and commitment therapy talk about is like how to recognize that things are unhelpful thoughts, and rather than trying to make them go away, it's just recognizing that they're
Oh,
unhelpful and they
yeah.
can be there.
Yes.
Um,
Because the eating disorder thoughts are not going to go away,
yeah,
however much you hope they go away. They,
yes,
well,
exactly.
eventually, yes. but just because you don't want to hear them doesn't stop them being there.
Yes, exactly.
Do you have a kind of a framework or a way of conceptualizing the recovery process?
I do. And so the way that I think about recovery, it's always easier when I'm when I'm doing this with people on a call or as part of a training, because then there's the visual component. So what I'll do is I'll just describe this without the visual. But
Yep.
for me, when I think about recovery, the thing that is in the center of this is full recovery. Like that is the place that we're aiming towards and we're working towards. Because as I said at the top, like this is where I believe everyone can get to, and anything less is selling yourself short.
Definitely.
And there are really three main areas that I focus on connected to this. So one is physical repair and recovery, because I truly believe so much of the eating disorder is really being driven by the physical state that the body is in, and that has an impact on the kinds of symptoms that arise. So what's going on with your different systems and organs within the body, and if they're not working as they should be, you're getting more of the symptoms that arise. But it also has an impact on the kinds of thoughts and feelings that naturally arise. That the state that you're in has an impact on what then naturally comes up, because the reality is we are not the author of our thoughts. We are a witness to our thoughts. The thoughts naturally arise into our consciousness, and we become aware of them and the kinds of thoughts that will come up. And these thoughts can be thoughts about today, this can be memories, it can be worries about the future. All of those that naturally arise, what comes up is connected to the state that you're in. And so really the first thing is focusing on how do we change that state. And so for recovery, a lot of that is connected to the food that someone's eating, the amount of food that someone's eating, the amount of exercise that someone's doing, all of those things that are going to help to improve someone's physical state.
So how would you suggest, if someone's fear is just so paralyzing, and it's because of their physical state, because they're so undernourished, their body is just in the panic zone the whole time, how can they get past that to start this physical repair?
So, a lot of it is you need to take action. Like the reality is that there's no words of wisdom that I can pass on that is going to change your state. The thing that will fundamentally change your state is bringing more energy to the system. I like the phrase that you don't think your way into acting differently, you act your way into thinking differently. It is really through the action taking that you'll start to think differently. And the way that I work, like I work in an outpatient setting. I'm not there forcing someone to eat. I'm not like, someone has to be recognizing, hey, I don't want to be living this way. As scary as it is, and as much as there's all this fear about all these changes, I also recognize this is not the life that I want to be leading, and that I'm going to need to make some changes as part of that. And so, yeah, as I said at the start, I think helping someone to recognize that recovery, as scary as it is the least worst option compared to living with an eating disorder. Like the living with the eating disorder is more difficult. And so, it's like you to get into a better state, the only way out is through. And it is then taking action to then start to bring in more energy, or to stop exercising so you're using less energy, but things that are going to start to change the energy balance of the body.
Yeah, I totally agree. And yeah, the actions have to come first.
Yeah.
Always.
Yeah. And so then the second piece of part of this framework is looking at developing coping skills and constructive coping skills, and developing resilience. And really, again, this is stuff that you'll use during recovery, but you'll use it for the rest of your life. And so there's so much that will come up as part of going through recovery. As we've talked about, there'll be these different thoughts, there'll be different feelings, there'll be different sensations. And what often happens is that the longer someone has lived with an eating disorder, it becomes their go-to solution for really everything. It's
Yes.
that thing of if all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. No matter what happens, whether that's someone sent you an email at work, you have a disagreement with your partner, you see this photo on Instagram, it's like whatever it is, the solution just gets funneled into, okay, now I need to do some kind of eating disorder behavior to cope. And so much of then the focus is how do we learn other ways of being able to cope so that thoughts can come up and I'm still able to take action, or that my mind is taking me to these future scenarios and I'm able to come back into the present. And so I use a lot of acceptance and commitment therapy for this. I use a lot of polyvagal theory for this, and different exercises that can then someone starts to learn how to practice to then support with this. And look, if they're not doing the bringing in more energy and changing the energy state, all of the different practices won't amount to very much. It's you're just pushing a boulder up a hill because you're not fundamentally changing that state to allow things to really change. And so, yeah, there's the coping skills and the developing resilience. And there's a lot of research around resilience and how important it is as part of recovery. And so, yeah, there's a real focus around that. And then the final piece is living a joy-filled life. And I think this can sound like hyperbole to start with, because not every day is joy-filled. I have a 7-year-old son, and I can guarantee you that we don't always have joy-filled days. And there will be challenges whenever with life. But what typically happens the longer someone has an eating disorder is that more and more of life falls by the wayside. And so those people I used to see, I just don't see them anymore. Those hobbies I used to do, unless it involves standing or walking or movement, they've fallen by the wayside. And I can't go on holidays in the way that I used to be able to before. And so all of these things just start getting chipped away. And it leads to a life that can feel pretty dull or bleak or not particularly worthwhile. And the sad reality is, rather than looking and saying, oh, wow, okay, the eating disorder is delivering all this, I need to do something different. What typically happens is, now I need to really hold on to the eating disorder because this is all I got.
Yes.
Thinness is all I got, or the way that I eat is all I've got. That meal at the end of the day that I've just held out for is so prized, and I won't let anyone take that thing away from me. And so
It's the only thing that brings me joy. Yeah.
Exactly. And so what often people think about when thinking about recovery is, I'm going to do recovery. I'm going to be the caterpillar that goes into the cocoon, and then I'm going to do recovery in this little shelter, and I'm going to come out this perfect, lovely butterfly, and then I'll get on with my life and I'll go back out into the world, and that's when I'm going to start doing all the things. And it just doesn't work like that. And so I'm encouraging people to start bringing the world back in while in recovery, because one, it allowed you to have certain experiences where, wow, that was really nice. Like, I really enjoyed seeing that person. I want more of that. And that's what recovery is going to deliver for me. Or you can have the experience of, shit, that didn't go the way I hoped it would. And I know it can go better than this. Like, it's an improvement to where it was before, and I want it to get better. And that's then another reason why I'm going to continue to do recovery. And so I think if all you look around and see is bleakness, it's like, what am I even recovering to? And so bringing more of that life in helps. And so that's really the sort of 10,000-foot view of the way that I think about recovery and the things that we focus on. But within each of those different buckets, there are lots of different practices and ideas and concepts.
I love that. And I totally agree with your order of things as well, because I think pretty much everyone I know, including myself, wants to do the coping skills and resilience before.
Yeah.
And it doesn't work because you don't even have the cognitive capacity to do it properly until you've got that energy going in.
Yeah. Well, I think the thing is, the resilience develops by going through the thing. It's not that I can do all this stuff in advance. Like, trying to do it in advance, you're not knocking up against the things that then develop that resilience. And in the beginning, you can have some little skills that will help you. And this is what I'll often work on with someone, of like, okay, let's develop this one thing that you can be using a lot. so that you can start to take action. It's all, everything I do is in service of how do we get you to take action as part of recovery. And so I got this one thing that I'm using and I'm using really regularly, and this is allowing me to, it just dials things down enough that I'm able to take the action that I need to then be able to develop the next skill and then the next skill. And then this turns into this much bigger thing of wow, I am able to cope much more than I thought I would. But yeah, all of those things are interconnected. Because yeah, if
Absolutely.
you then start doing meals with your friends, like that gives you a fuller life, but it also means that there's more food coming in, but it also means you're having to deal with the coping skills leading up to the meal, after the meal. And so all of these things just feed back into one another.
Like a beautiful tapestry. And I love that you
Yes.
mentioned the joy-filled life, because if we don't start introducing that, if we don't start doing the things that make us happy, it's almost like all we've got is loss
Yeah.
and emptiness.
Yeah.
And I remember one of my biggest fears was, I don't know who I am without the eating disorder. I've got nothing. It's
Yeah.
literally been my identity.
Yeah.
And I was terrified. I was terrified of who I would be and what would I do if I wasn't doing all this crazy exercise? What would I do if I wasn't spending hours and hours and hours baking to feed other people so that I could feel better about not eating
Yeah.
or eating? And you just are left with a big void if you're not filling it with joy.
Yeah, definitely. And I think with the identity piece, this is a thing that comes up a lot for people of like, as you talked about, like this is my identity, and it could be people know me as the fit one, or people know me as the one that exercises, or people know me as the vegan, or the whatever it is.
And you get
And it's
validation for that as well.
you do get validation. And I think what often happens is people want to work out, okay, what's my new identity going to be before I make any of these changes? And again, that doesn't work, because if we think about someone's identity, their identity is based on what do they spend their time doing. Like I
Yeah.
talked earlier about my love of golf. I identify, well, part of my identity is golf. And part of the reason that's the case is because I do the thing for so much of my time, or I listen to things, or I'm reading about it. Music is a huge part of my identity. I spend 8, 10 hours a day listening to music while I work. I spent years, decades going to music festivals. And so it's part of my identity because I spend time on it. And so to change your identity, you can't do that in advance because you're not spending the time on the things to have that new identity um, uh, come to fruition. And I think one of the reasons why bringing life back in is important is if you're removing things, you then just have this gaping void. And one of the worst things that you can have with an eating disorder is idle time, because idle time will just get filled with unhelpful thoughts and worry and anxiety. So it's okay, I've now removed this thing that I was doing. What can I be intentionally bringing in during this time? And maybe it's not as enjoyable, or it's not as up to the eating disorder standards, but it's something that I'm now feeling that time with.
And the more you let go of the eating disorder behaviors and thoughts and everything, the more space you have to be able to enjoy other things.
Yeah.
Because when I was in the anorexia, it was like my world was so small and I
Yeah.
didn't notice things around me.
Yeah.
I was too trapped in my head. And as I started to recover more and more and was taking more and more energy on, that prison got bigger and bigger.
Yeah.
And I started to see things like, I remember going for a walk with my husband, a walk we'd done so many times before. And I went, wow, there's loads of like castle ruins there. And they look really old. How long have they been there? And he's like, they've always been there. We've walked past them every time. I was like, but I've never seen them before.
Yeah.
And it's that opening up your space and your awareness and allowing the world in.
Yeah, for sure. And I think I would add with this is managing expectations is really important as part of recovery. And I love what you said there. And if the expectation is as soon as I make this change, my world is going to just open up and it's going to be so joy filled and it's going to be so amazing and I'm going to notice the colors of all the flowers, that's just not going to happen. It happens incrementally and it happens with
Absolutely.
time. And again, when you talked about like what are some of the mistakes that people are making, often one of the mistakes is I'm going to make this change and I'm instantly going to notice an upside and I'm instantly going to notice this huge benefit. And that's what's going to tell me that I'm doing the right thing in recovery. And if I don't notice that, I must be doing the wrong thing. And there's all this extra anxiety, so this must be the wrong thing. And so it's recognizing that with time, those things will start to become more common, but we can't expect that to happen on day one. And look, you can notice some benefits. There can be these glimmers of, hey, my concentration was that little bit better. My energy was that bit better, or I didn't have that same gnawing sensation that I normally get in my stomach. Great, but we shouldn't be expecting massive changes
Yeah,
from day one.
definitely. I often say to my clients, it's not a one and done, it's a
Yeah,
practice. And I think they laugh at me because, like, a word I come out with all the time is consistency,
yep,
because it's so important.
yeah,
None of recovery is a one and done, it's always a practice and it builds each time on each step builds. You can't just do like, okay, I'm going to eat today and I still feel terrible tomorrow.
yeah, yeah. And look, consistency is boring and it's unsexy, but it's also the thing that truly does deliver recovery. And that,
Absolutely. And I don't know, consistency can feel, actually can feel quite safe.
yeah, no, I definitely agree with that. And again, managing expectations, it might not feel safe on day one.
No, not on day one. But I think a lot of people thrive on some form of fairly flexible structure.
Totally. Totally. And this is the thing when I talked about um, context is everything, is what is important for you right now. And so
Yes.
if I'm at the beginning with someone, the most important thing is getting in more energy, more food coming in. And so if that means they're then having the same thing every single day, I don't care. Because the goal at that point is how do we bring more energy in? At some point, the goal might be or becomes how do we get more variety? How do we have you be able to eat different foods where it's not creating the same kind of fear response? But that's not the goal on day one. And so it's really understanding, okay, what is important at each stage of recovery or the stage that you're at and focusing on that thing. And yeah, I think structure is hugely important. I'm a big advocate of structure, especially because you don't want to be turning up at every meal and having to decide. Like that's a
That can
huge
be so
cognitive
hard.
load.
Yeah.
That's a huge open door for the eating disorder to start to get in and have its way in conversation, etc. So it's like, no, we've decided this in advance. The thing that you need to do at this meal is show up and eat. You're not deciding, do I need to do this? What am I eating? It's like, cool, we turn up and I just do the thing that is already part of my goal.
Yeah, I totally agree. As long as the thing, it doesn't matter what you eat, as long as it is giving you energy and is
Yeah,
digestible to an already stressed system. So
totally.
if you're eating lentils and vegetables
Yeah,
only, that's not going to be giving you the energy and or be particularly digestible to an already stressed system.
yeah. Yeah, no, I'm on board with you on that one. Yeah. It needs the thing that you're doing then needs to actually work.
Yes, absolutely. So if someone wanted to get started with recovery today, what would you suggest they do?
So, I mean, we've talked about lots of different things connected to this, but I think one would be, and we haven't actually talked about this, I think you should find someone to work with.
I
I'm
agree.
a huge advocate of the fact that recovery is tough. It is a full contact sport. You don't really want to do this on your own. And yes, I know there are people online, there are recovery coaches that where that is part of their story. And it's not that I don't believe that they did that. It's just, I don't believe it is the best way. There's a real survivorship bias that occurs where people who did it on their own are then often some of the loudest voices, and it feels like, oh, that's the way that we should be doing this. And I don't believe that that
Why
is the case.
wouldn't you want to make it a bit easier on yourself and
For
get
sure.
help?
For sure. And you know from your own experience that trying to make changes, there are then all of this second guessing, am I doing the right thing? Like there's all of this stuff that then comes up. So why wouldn't you want to have a support network or a coach or someone who's able to then validate those things or say, look, I know the eating disorder is creating this thought, but actually this is the thing that you should be doing. And I've done this for the last 15 years working with people. This is the thing that you need to be doing, and having that support. And it's not that you can't be collaborating on some of the decisions, but having someone in your corner who is then able to say, hey, I know that these are the thoughts that are coming up. I'm going to be your voice of sanity.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I totally agree.
So that would be the first one. I think the second one would be setting a meaningful goal. I mean, we talked about this earlier in terms of making a change that is meaningful, and really figuring out, okay, what is that thing that you're going to focus on? Because I when working with clients, I will always have them set one or maybe two goals where, okay, that is where we're putting the focus, because there's a million things that you could be changing in recovery. And if you're not specific about it, you're like, oh, maybe I'll do that thing later on, or maybe I'll change this thing. And so it becomes very up in the air. And again, the eating disorder will love that kind of thing. So I'm like, set a very clear, specific goal. So you're clear of, did I do that thing today? It's very binary. It's very black and white. I know that I added in that chocolate bar with my lunch. I know I did this thing, whatever it is. It's like, I know that that thing happened. And so that would be the second one. And then the third one would be finding someone technique to be able to deal with the thoughts or the feelings or the sensations that arise. Like if I'm thinking about acceptance and commitment therapy, they talk about diffusion, and there's ways of creating space between yourself and your thoughts. There's other exercises where, how do I bring myself back into the present moment? So am I going to notice 5 things in the room, or notice 5 things I hear, or doing the dropping anchor from acceptance commitment therapy? Like find one technique and just use that to start with, that allows you to be able to be better at following through on the goals. And then the final piece is just take action. Like nothing changes unless actual action taking takes place. And so it's all of those other things are in service of then you then taking that action. So yeah, I think that would be how I would recommend or suggest that people get started.
I think that's fantastic, and I completely agree. Just one thing to add into the little technique to help you with those thoughts that I personally found really helpful and doesn't seem to get talked about that much, is humming.
Yeah.
Because it's impossible to think when you hum. The noise completely fills your head.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
it's fantastic at bringing you back to now and just blocking out everything else just so that you can take that action.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah. I mean, I put that in the same category of diffusion. So within acceptance commitment therapy, diffusion is, how do you create space between yourself and your thoughts? So not that those thoughts go away, but by creating space, I can recognize that they are just thoughts. I don't need to give them power. It doesn't mean that it's a belief of mine. It doesn't mean that it's something I value. It's just that thought came up. And so there's lots of different ways that you can do that. And humming can be one of those ways.
Yeah. So 2 things. How can people work with you? And is there anything I haven't asked you that you would like to share with the listeners?
So in terms of how can people work with me, so my website is Seven, so the word spelled out, so SEVEN-health.com, and there I have sort of everything that you will need in terms of, I've got a podcast there. My podcast is called Real Health Radio. I have a blog there. There's ways that you can sign up to my mailing list that talks about how you can work with me there. And so I would say
all
that
these links in the show notes as well.
Perfect. Yeah. So the number one thing I would say is go to that website, and yeah, and you can find out everything. In terms of what you haven't asked, I don't think there is anything. I really enjoyed this conversation. I felt like we've got to touch on lots of different things. I guess I would just reiterate what has been said many times, is that, yeah, full recovery is absolutely possible. It is on the menu for you and for everyone. And that, yeah, living with an eating disorder is the way harder thing to do than recovery.
Yeah, I totally agree. And full recovery is so worth it.
Yeah, yeah, it is. I mean, you are the shining example of that. And I've had many clients that I work with who are in a similar situation, who've had this really long-standing eating disorder and now out the other side. And I think the one thing that people often have connected to that is, I wish I did this earlier.
Yes, and everything happens for a reason,
Totally.
and it
Yeah.
happens at the right time. So regretting anything from the past is pointless, isn't it?
Oh, totally. And look, you can have a huge amount of compassion for yourself and all that, but
Yeah.
no one's like, I should have stayed in that longer.
No, I've never heard that. Yeah, very
Yeah.
good point. Never ever heard that. All right. Thank you so much for being a fantastic guest. I've really enjoyed this conversation. And thank you so much, listeners, for being here. Please do rate this podcast 5 stars so that we can reach more people. And as always, I really appreciate you. Thank you.
Thank you.